The Alberni Valley is full of history, and mostly it's history that we know where it starts from and where it ends, such as World War I, World War II. We saw start times, end times, but there are some pieces of history that just leave us in mystery, such as a story of Nils Weiner, who disappeared in September of 1944, with never to be seen again. This is a mystery so great that a local author, Frank Holmes, had to write about it. Tell us a little bit about Nils Weiner. What was he like? What kind of personality was he to get mentioned in a book?
First of all, the book is about Sprout Lake, and he had about a 30-year history at the lake. So Nils Weiner, we don't know about his childhood. He grew up, born in 1880 in Sweden, and he was originally named Edlund, Nils Edlund, but as soon as he became an adult, he changed his surname. So when he was 25, he moved away from Sweden and came across by boat on the Atlantic to Canada. And from Canada's east coast, he came across through the Revelstoke and operated for 3 years a little grocery store for the miners in Revelstoke. And when he came across, there was a sweet young thing on the boat that he took an interest in, and soon they met up once again. Now, after Revelstoke, in 1907, he married Anna, and in 1910, the rest of his family came across, and they were in Victoria. So his 2 parents and 4 siblings all came across to Victoria, and then as he wanted to get into a homesteading lifestyle, pioneer lifestyle, he and the family moved up to Port Alberni, the Alberni Valley. So married in 1907, wonderful, healthy, athletic, skilled wife, and Anna was a blessing to him. Anna and Nels lived in Frank Sterling's log cabin out on Sterling Arm of Sprout Lake. Thought this is a great place and began looking for property. They found it the next year in 1913. He bought 42 acres of land on what was then called Brennan's Bay. We also know it as Weiner Bay. We also know it as West Bay, or right now Sprout's Landing. So their purpose was to homestead, and they started immediately supplying places like Klitza Lodge. Mrs. Wark had it, and then the Coles had it, while they lived their lifestyle, which was quite adventuresome. When they were at their homestead with their cows and their chickens and their vegetable patch, both Nels and Anna were involved in hunting and fishing. They both loved it. And Anna also liked to do home cooking, which Nels appreciated, and she also made handmade rugs, a skill that the pioneers had to have. Now, sadly, she died when she was 40. She died in 1925, and Nels was heartbroken. He lost his partner, his assistant. She lived at the lake for 12 years. They got the homestead going, and now he was alone. It crushed him. Now, he seemed to have been an outgoing, happy outdoorsman, but as the decades progressed, things began falling flat on him, going wrong, and the loss of his wife was one of the early triggers. They lived cheaply, and Nels rarely had much cash. He never consumed tobacco, never consumed alcohol. He lived cheaply off his little hobby farm and taking in odd jobs. Nels also liked fishing. One of the photographs that the Alberni Valley Museum have is of Mrs. Cole of Klitza Lodge and Nels out fishing. He was a mechanic, skilled mechanic, self-trained. He liked to make fly fishing rods. He also liked to make carved rifle stocks. He was an all-round craftsman, self-taught, even made many of his own tools. He was a very respected, honest person. He was known for being overly diligently honest. People around the lake trusted him with their keys. 2 millionaires had houses there. Nels had the keys to their houses. Nels never borrowed any firewood from anybody as the winter progressed. Nels would not go diving when people said, oh, I lost my keys, I lost this, lost that into the water. He would not go diving for it unless that person was present. Just so nobody took a cheap shot at him saying, oh, he probably went and dove and found it and put it in his pocket and said he never found it. Nels was meticulously honest by character. He did find another lady, a young American lady, and she was a maid at one of the houses, and she and he seemed to get along well for about a year, and then she left him with another man and left the valley. So Nels was unlucky in love twice, and increasingly this rattled his cage bars. Increasingly he became moodier, angrier, miffed.
Yeah. I believe there was also some anger presented when people were saying because of his last name they thought he was Prussian or German, that there was some belief that he was on their side.
I mentioned that he changed his name from Edlund to Weiner. He changed his name probably because of what his dad did to his childhood savings used to buy a violin. His dad said, oh, the violin is a tool of the devil, and smashed his violin, just broke him.
Yeah.
Here he had more problems again. So I assume that he changed his name because he was ashamed of his father, sadly. Now, Nels was known for making violins once he was here and settled into his homestead. He had his barn, he had outbuildings, he had a garage, he had his little house. He was an amazing man, and his tools, largely half self-made, were used to make these amazing high quality in craft and in sound violins. He made over 30 of them. 2 of them are here in the Alberni Valley Museum. He went out and injected dyes into the trees so it would be the right colored wood when he came to cutting the wood and drying the wood and milling the wood. He made the entire violin except for the catgut strings. He made the body, the neck, the curlicues. He was an amazing self-taught craftsman. He made shellac from local salal trees. Now, in the Depression, as he was making these violins, money was tight, and he was selling these violins for $300 to $1,000 each. Good money.
Yeah.
He did well, and people brought other violins to him for repair. He was well respected for his violin skills. As the years progressed through the 30s into the 40s, and he had this apparently Germanic name, hassles, problems, annoyances developed in his life. He was ever increasingly moody. People didn't know if they should go and visit him because he was often sitting on the porch with a gun in his lap. He'd be walking around his property with a gun. It was risky to go and visit him despite his good, honest, great reputation.
I heard that there were some arguments with people who he claimed were trespassing, and that in certain times shots had been fired.
Yes, sir. He took some shots at trespassers several times. And so this again leads to suspicion, did they come and get revenge? He also shot at their dogs, which were raiding his trap line for fur-bearing animals. People don't appreciate that. He went and hassled people around the lake shore when they had large bonfires on the shoreline. He was annoyed by many little trigger items. He'd go and hassle people having beach parties. They were making too much noise. He was annoyed by the logging that was getting closer and closer to his property. He was annoyed by the road building that got closer and closer. He was losing his privacy that was so sacred to him. So then there came the accusations of, well, maybe you're one of them, the Axis instead of the Allies during World War II.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a German, maybe he's a spy, an infiltrator. And he did express regrets about how the Germans were losing the Eastern Front in 1944 as the Russians recouped their area. People hassled him about his name, about his allegiance. They hassled him about bothering people on his property. He led a very conflicting life with his neighbors.
Yeah. But just prior to his disappearance, it's claimed that he sold something like $2,000 worth of lumber to the forest companies after not liking them, intruding into his area.
Yes, he hated the forestry and the noise and the intrusion and the roads that were ever progressing towards his property, and yet obviously he had this double side that he needed money, revenue. So why did things happen? Well, on that date, September the 27th of 1944, at 3:15 in the morning, was a tremendous explosion. Now, did he suicide? Did somebody kill him? Well, let's see. The explosion was so big that every house, Harold Bishop mentions that all the houses around the lake, windows and doors, rattled with this explosion. It was a big one. And it reverberated off the Beaufort Hills and was heard in Alberni. So it was a dandy explosion. So of course people go running towards it. Now it was 3:15 in the morning. Now that's a pretty exotic time for a crime to occur. What happened? Only two people know, Nils and God.
Yeah.
Now what happened that either he suddenly got soured and decided to suicide, or did somebody do him in, or did he make a new start? There's three theories as to what caused this explosion. Mention has been made of a loss of several boxes of dynamite nearby from a road construction site. And yet he had no fuses, he had no dynamite caps to set this off. And if the dynamite had been stored in as well, it would have been uselessly wet. So his setting off the explosion doesn't make a lot of sense by the building progress or by the process. He had keys to many properties, and after the explosion and his disappearance, death, then several of the rich people's houses were broken into using keys on very fancy heavy-duty locks. And he had those keys which disappeared at the explosion. So the suspicion is that maybe there were crooks that were involved at his property or at nearby properties. Not a violin was found. Now you think something would remain after a fire or explosion. Not one of his gun collection was found. One rifle later turned up at a pawn shop in Nanaimo a few years later.
Was that the 6.5
Yes.
Mannlicher?
Very specialized collector item. He had outboard engines. None of them were still on the property, and they shouldn't disappear in a fire. All of his fly rods had disappeared. So it looks like maybe somebody is there cleaning it before the ultimate disaster. We don't know what happened to him. He never was registered in any future city. He was never in any census. He's never a property owner. So did he just simply evaporate? Maybe. His land sat there and taxes were owed. Nobody from his family came to collect the property. Nobody came to report on closure of the estate, and the property was sold for back taxes that were owed to the government. What became of Nils? We don't know. For 78 years now, it's been a mystery. What happened to Nils, the pioneer craftsman and settler at Sprout Lake? Amazing skilled man, but a mystery in his life and a mystery in his death.
When talking about Nils Weiner, you have to talk about violin making, for he was one of the best. He would start with some of the finest maple trees, the ones with the best grain for violin making. He would then inject the roots and the trunk with dyes, so that the dyes would naturally go into the wood. After that process had been done, he would take them, he would cut the wood into the proper slabs where they would be dried, and then he would have a solar drying process also. This is a long and complex job, but it was worth it for the product. The next thing, he would have to take each of these slabs and cut them into the proper shapes. To do that, you have to have the best of tools. And the tools he had were the tools he made. for just about everything of Mr. Weiner's violins was made by him. The only thing he didn't make were the actual strings. Everything from the body of the violin to the bow were all made from things on the property. After the violin was made, he would use salal. He would boil it down to make the actual shellacs for the violin, and also use them as the rosins for the bow. But still, even after that, he would still have a musician come and check to make sure it was giving the proper music. And then he would even name them. Names like panther and cougar. Names that belonged to nature, powerful names that basically described what he was building. Only after all of that would he sell his violins. And these violins at that time were quite expensive, ranging anywhere from $300 to $1,000 each. And this was the quality of work Nils Elmar Weiner put into his violins. Good morning, Lee. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You've studied a little bit of the Nils Weiner case.
Yes.
What do you think of it in a forensic manner?
Well, first of all, there is no forensics. There's all a lot of guesses and rumors and things, but there's quite a bit of stuff in there that would not result in any kind of a criminal investigation. That's for sure. After this explosion and fire, if you were going to do a real criminal investigation, you'd seal off the area and do a very thorough scene examination. And that wasn't done in this case from what I've read. In fact, there was lots of neighbors came around to look around to see what happened, and it did say that the police came and had a look, but they didn't say what they looked for, and apparently there's no police reports left, which, well, after 77 years there might not be.
Of the three different incidents, there's one that says he might have done himself in. What do you think of that as a probability?
Well, it's possible. Anything's possible, but if he did himself in, I don't think he did it at the scene. There was some indication that his well that he took some great pride in digging was blowing up, and that he was inside the well when he blew himself up. If that was the case, of course, he would have been killed, and there would have been pieces all over the place, clothing and flesh. And apparently they looked around. In fact, they dismantled the well and took some of the lining out and couldn't find any. No matter what size of an explosion, there's going to be particles around, even blood splatter. And none of that was indicated in the article that there was ever found any. In fact, they said there was nothing found to indicate that he had done that.
There's also a theory that he was done in by someone else. Is there much evidence to support that?
There's none. No evidence to support that there's anything happened. They said there was a prowler one time and he took a shot at somebody, but there's nothing, and that's just rumor and again gossip. There's no clear-cut evidence to indicate that there was any kind of criminal activity actually, other than his buildings were burnt and his well was blown up. And quite truthful, if he had some traumatic experiences in his life, and the last one I think is, I think they indicated he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And he was a very proud man. He was very meticulous. He was very intelligent apparently. And he had a couple other tragic incidences in his life. One where he had scraped all his money together as a child and bought a violin. And then he was so proud of the violin, he went to show his family, and his father was so upset that he had bought this violin that he smashed it to pieces. And when and then his wife died, who he cherished, was his soulmate, for lack of a better term, and he was very devastated by that. So there was two traumatic incidents right there. And after his wife died, he went into a kitchen cupboard and retrieved the remains of this violin that was smashed as a child. Now that's several years later. Now, he's born in Sweden, and that's where the violin was smashed in, yet here he is in Port Alberni with the remains of the violin in the closet that he had saved for all those years.
I think the rough math, it's something over 20 years.
Exactly, yes. So a lot of years he saved these material pieces, so obviously that was something of importance to him. And after his wife died, which was a second traumatic incident, he brought this smashed violin out, and sort of then he decided he was going to make violins. So he was, reverting back to some of his fond childhood memories, I would assume. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't claim to be, and so it's hard for me to say what he was really thinking. But I think he was trying to recreate his happy moments. And after his wife died, he became despondent, I think, for lack of a better term. He was really upset about this. And then he had a diagnosis of a terminal illness, I believe, it said in the paper. And that could be the third triggering incident that said, what's the use? I'm going to die anyway. And he was such a smart individual. If he was going to move on or do himself in, I don't think he would. I don't think he would have left many clues behind if he was really wanting to do this. And so I really think he just moved on to a different space. Now, a few other things happened. They were starting to log around his private property. He really enjoyed his privacy. He enjoyed hunting, although at the last he said he didn't shoot anything. In fact, the deer were coming to eat on his grass and the fruits from his trees and stuff.
He seemed to have had a bit of a personality change towards the end.
Exactly, and that we don't know what kind of an illness he had. It's a possibility that maybe he had a brain tumor, who knows, which will change your personality. And so that could have triggered him. And so if he had, in those days he would have had cancer, maybe he had a brain tumor, which would have changed his personality considerably. And then reverting back to these other instances, who knows what he would have done.
But to me, it's the explosives, because there is no recorded purchases of any types of explosives by him up to that time, unless it was much earlier.
Well, exactly, and I don't know. Sometimes I think in those days they would buy explosives for stump removal and stuff. So I don't know what kind of records they would have kept in regards to explosives, if they even kept any records. There was some indication that there was a highway crew working nearby, and the explosives came from there. However, in the correspondence I read, Weiner was a very honest and meticulous man who would be very beyond his character to steal anything or commit any kind of criminal act.
Yeah, that kind of makes me wonder about the explosives. They sort of seem to stand out as an anomaly.
Yeah, it could be like you call a red herring. He might have wanted to. He took such great pride in building this well. He might have said, "I'm just going to blow it up. I've had it," and who knows what he was thinking. And so where he got the explosives, or maybe he had somebody come and blow it up for him. And then once the well was gone, and it would have blown part of his house up, because I think the well was pretty close underneath his house. The rest of the outbuildings he could have set fire to, and then just moved on.
Mm-hmm. There was one person who had made mention of skeletal remains.
Yeah, they were in the lake, and it would be for skeletal remains, and they were found shortly after this incident. And for skeletal remains to be found in water would take years for the body to decompose. And I don't know how intact the skeletal remains were, but I find it very unlikely that if they were skeletal remains, it would be his. Who knows how they got there, but this is in the 40s. Somebody may have drowned. And usually when a body drowns, it'll eventually float unless it gets weighted down with something. Because as a body deteriorates, it builds up gases, and then the body floats to the surface. So, but it takes a long time to do this. Like they wouldn't find skeletal remains. If they did, it would be years after if it was him.
And then there was another person who said they witnessed him near the bus depot, pardon me.
Yeah,
the day after.
Yeah, I think they said he was at a bus stop, and I think so. There was one instance where they said he was at the ferry landing or something. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, he might be just moving on to some other area. Now he was kind of a recluse because he liked his privacy, and who knows, he knew the trails very well. He might have just got a knapsack and moved on, or his bicycle, because I don't think they ever found.
No,
They never found his bicycle. They found his car and all his, but they said his tools were gone. But I mean, nobody was allowed in this workshop where he made his violin, so I don't know what kind of tools they would know what he had. So
Anyway, it's quite an interesting story.
well, it is, and you know, this happened in what, 1947, I believe. Is when
44 is when he...
44, September of
vanished, yes.
44. And it was right around the time when the British Columbia Police, which was the provincial police at the time, were changing over to RCMP. The RCMP took over in 1950, so whether that had anything to do with the investigation, I don't know. Whether they were changing the BC provincial police to RCMP because of inadequate investigations or problems, I have no idea. But that was right around that period as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that are strange. But as far as a criminal act, there's absolutely nothing there to indicate that there was any kind of criminality involved in all. Now, you know, the burning of the buildings, if he wants to burn his own buildings, if you want to burn your house, it's your property, you can do whatever you want with it. And that's not criminal. If he wants to blow up his well, he can blow up his well. Now, nowadays, there's a lot more controls, like if you buy dynamite, it's recorded. I don't know what the controls were back in those days. And even nowadays, we got forensic. The DNA is and the chemical analysis so greatly improved that they might not be looking for blood spots, or you know, you just need a minute quality of anything, and the lab would be able to determine whether it was human and then get the DNA out of it, which they didn't have that scientific advantage in that time, that part of history way back when.
Okay.
Files like this is why they've developed the DNA and the scientific evidence the way they have. If he committed suicide, I don't think he did it on the property. And there's no evidence to indicate any criminality. So my theory would be that he, with the 3 major events in his life, he decided, I'm moving out of here.
Maybe one day we'll find out.
Maybe one day we'll find out.
There are many theories and beliefs as to what happened to Nils Weiner. It seems everybody has their own theory, or at least a variation of a theory. Here's one I found when I was researching the archives. It was written by Bob Cole. It's a story of how he met Gunny Brown, one of the Cougar Brown family. It all started for Gunny when he was at a yard sale in the mid-70s, when he had found a Mannlicher 6.5 millimeter rifle. Gunny had asked the seller where he had acquired this weapon. The seller mentioned that he had acquired it from a pig farmer who had lived out in Sprout Lake, a pig farmer who lived not that far from Nils. Gunny remembered the pig farmer as having quite a ramshackle place, as he could see it when he was traveling to work on the speed line that he was taking every day. He would also wave to Nils when he saw him. During one of those days when they were doing some land clearing, they had finished quite early in the day, so they were taking part of the day off to wait for the speeder to come and get them. During that time, Gunny heard a strange noise, at which time he looked around and he saw the pig farmer trying to break into the clasp on the explosives box. He later saw him poking around in some of the soft dirt that had been moved by the caterpillar earlier in the day. Was that pig farmer looking for easy ground to bury a body? I don't know, and maybe we'll never know. But Gunny always said that he had a strange feeling every time he went through that back logging road near that area. Nils Weiner. His disappearance is one of the great mysteries of our valley. But I'm hopeful that in time technology will improve and we may be able to find out what has happened to him. But until then, I'd like to think that he made the great escape, that he ended up somewhere in South America or a tropical island, and that one day we'll find a Weiner violin from one of those places. But until that time, I'm Gerald LeBute, your neighborhood time traveler, and I'll see you next time, whenever in time that may be.